We are following breaking news. This just in, the California Parole Board has denied Lyle Menendez parole. Of course, this decision coming down hours after this hearing began at 9 a.m. this morning, and the decision coming the day after Lyle Menendez's younger brother, Erik, 54 years old, was also denied parole by the California Parole Board.
So two commissioners made the decision, again, after almost, about 11 hours of testimony questioning Lyle. We have a lot of the details that we'll be able to release right now, but we're going to assume that because of what we read, details about violations of prison rules, in his case.
We can read them now.
We can.
Yeah.
We have cell phone violations, unusual possession of a pair of soccer shoes.
Well,
things like that.
Yeah, the parole commissioner for the Lyle Menendez hearing today explains the factors that she would review when it came to Lyle. She says the nature of the crime, Lyle's growth and change while in custody, while giving weight to both his age at the time of the crime and his age now. So considering all those factors, she has deemed him unsuitable for parole. In fact, she says, she notes that the risk assessment found Lyle would face a, quote, moderate risk of violence if released.
Right, which, from reading all of this, it seems to be that they have to pose an extreme risk of violence in order to not be released. That moderate is within the rules, so to speak, of allowing this to be released. So just because you're deemed moderate doesn't mean that you would necessarily be denied right out of the gate. But
also,
historically, people with this kind of criminal background, with this kind of crime, don't get parole.
Right.
At least on the first
try. And this is the first time because it was just in May that their sentences were reduced to the possibility of parole.
But it's also sort of uncharted waters because, I mean, I can't imagine any double murder in recent history where more than a dozen victims of the family members of the victims testify on behalf of the killers.
Right.
And you would think that would have an enormous impact on the parole commissioners. Now, we haven't heard from them directly, so we can't ask them that question. But there's just so many aspects to this case which are fascinating.
What we're still waiting to learn as it relates to Lyle is he up for parole in another 3 years, like his brother Erik? Erik, 54, Lyle, 57 years old. And then also, and I believe it was Lou Shapiro, the attorney who we just had on in Ed's piece, was saying that, you know, the hope would be then at this point, although they are trying to get a new trial, Governor Gavin Newsom, if he would step in and grant them clemency, which is highly unlikely according to legal experts.
Right.
Let's go back to Ed Lascos in downtown Los Angeles. You're outside Mark Garagos's office. He represents the Menendez brothers. Ed, denied parole, Lyle Menendez.
Yeah, not surprising to many people. I say legal experts who study this kind of thing because they were basing it on the situation yesterday and the line of questioning that happened to Lyle's younger brother, Erik, particularly the two different commissioners at the time, then zeroing in on the time in prison, all those decades in prison, and the violations that came up with Erik. And we know that that was also part of the questioning that was taking place today with Lyle. We can assume because we're waiting for the complete transcripts of that at this point. So you got to think about it, and I found that interesting because you would think when you hear about a parole and a parole hearing, we've all been thought to think that, just keeping an eye on some of the folks walking through here at night downtown LA. In any event, when you talk about the parole, you always think about whether they're going to be asking a lot of questions about the killings, about how you've rehabilitated yourself, about your feelings, your anger, are you a threat to society? But then the questioning, most of the questioning, which had a huge impact, as we know yesterday, with Erik's situation and his denial of parole, was simply about all those violations in prison, saying, well, you were locked up for all of these years. You did not play by the rule. You were not an A number one inmate. And that was a big concern and the reason why the commissioner said because of that yesterday with Erik, that's why we feel you're a threat and we're not going to grant you parole. And we know part of that, we can assume, was the questioning today with Lyle. So that I found very interesting that, you know, certainly they look back at what happened back in 1989, those grisly murders, but it's really about what the brothers have done since then. then in incarceration. You know, there's been stories about how they've helped other inmates, how they've helped them with their studies, how they've helped them get their degrees and all this kind of stuff. But as the attorneys have been telling us, that's one side of the story, the good side of the story that we hear about the Menendez brothers. But there's always two sides of the story, and it's something that only the board, the parole board and the commissioners have themselves, is that history behind bars and those violations, which are very telling, and in the case of the Menendez brothers with these 2 denials, very damning in their attempt to get some freedom.
A couple of quotes we want to share with our viewers and you as well. I'm sure you've read through some of this because this was some of the pool reporting from the LA Times that we had access to prior to getting this official decision. Lyle talking about him, how he views himself, and he refers to himself as a peacekeeper. He said this today. Quote, I would never call myself a model incarcerated person. I would say that I'm a good person, that I spent my time helping people, that I'm very open and accepting. I'm the guy that officers will come to resolve conflicts. So that's one quote that we have. This is about his relationship with his mother when asked about sexual abuse that he suffered at the hands of his mother. And he says this: there's so little love in my relationship with my mother that was overt. We'd sometimes have these moments of connection. I get that it's abuse, but there was a lot of love in it. I know when I talk about it, someone else is going to use it as an abusive event, and I don't like it.
Not really clear what that was referring to. And Ed, you were talking about the parole board grilling Menendez. They talked about getting witnesses to lie during his trials, the shopping spree that he and his brother went on after the killing. He talked about whether they asked him whether he felt relief after the murders, which all of this seems to be relitigating the murders, which I keep hearing they weren't supposed to do. They were supposed to talk about how are they today and are they an unreasonable threat to society.
I think, though, you could make the case that maybe that leads up to where you're going, Phil, and what your thoughts might be, that it's supposed to lead up to where they are today. But, you know, where we've come in the past is where we go in the future, if you will, if you buy into that way of thinking. So they have this horrible situation, how they have dealt with it, where are they at now in their recovery? You know, is there some peace? Is there still a violent tendency? Because remember, one of the tenets of the parole commission is really to, the state parole board is really to talk to the inmates as they come up for their possibility of being granted parole, to determine particularly, and bottom line, are they still a threat? If we let them go, we give them our freedom. And think about it, when you've got some inmates, in this case, 2 brothers, and you know, you've got to be very careful because you know they've committed double murders. Yeah,
and getting back to what Phil was saying about the spending spree that they went on after, the parole commissioner today asked Lyle if spending and having, quote, flashy things helped him cope with his sorrow, and he says it helped him feel good in the moment, lifted him out of, quote, this anguish. My life had just collapsed without my parents.
So here's something, Ed and Marla, that is going to throw a real monkey wrench into all of this, because as we've been reporting, strict rules on how this whole hearing is held. There's no live feed, there's no video feed, there's audio feed. Somehow the parole board erroneously released audio excerpts that other networks have aired, and over the objections of Lyle's attorneys and Erik's attorneys.
And we know that on the record, as opposed to it was leaked, because
this is what the LA Times reporter, who happens to be the pool reporter, was there, is telling us. And so, is it possible that this may be used as a way to invalidate the proceedings? I'm just raising that as, I guarantee you this is going to come up going forward.
I can imagine Mark Garagos using this.
I mean, I don't know what the grounds would be, because it doesn't affect the specifics of what happened when Erik and Lyle were behind bars, but at any rate, just another complicating factor in a multifaceted case. Well, you
would think Mark Garagos would be all over that. You know him very well, as I do. He's one of the best at what he does, and he will, he'll take any angle. And his angle certainly has been he wants both of these brothers freed, released. He's been a huge supporter of their story and what's been going on. So yes, I would think anything he can find, any chink in the armor, if you will, is the way he's going to go. Also, if we have another moment, when you talk about the state parole board, it was an interesting point that our attorney Lou Shapiro made. We were talking to him earlier. Is that think about the precedents this would set. You have a high-profile case like this. You've got two brothers, double murder of their parents, and then possibly you set them free. Under what guidelines? Does that change the entire system where you have other killers, convicted killers, coming up looking for their parole, saying they have been rehabilitated, and you're opening the floodgates? That's an argument, a theory that's been going around in the legal circles, which is rather interesting. So there's a lot at stake here when you think about the entire system and not just two brothers.
Sure, but I mean, the theory obviously is that every case is handled individually. That's why I have this rotating system of 21 different parole commissioners. The other thing that fascinates me, among many things, is that we haven't heard much detail about the psychological evaluations that are part of this whole process. Well, the threat assessment that the governor ordered, because these parole commissioners aren't psychologists.
Right.
You know, they're trying to get inside the minds of Erik and Lyle and say, okay, if we release you, are you going to go, you know, shotgun someone else or not? And I mean, that's the bottom line. And so I'd like to really figure out a way to learn more about what psychological evaluations were done and what the details of the risk assessments were. And so far, that information isn't really out there.
No, simply that he was deemed moderate risk.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, they haven't said that. I don't know if we're ever going to get that, but you know, I look at it as a sense of they kept centering in on the years and the violations. We've been talking about that over and over through all the decades that the Menendez brothers have been behind bars, state custody. And I guess you could make the point, the debate that one of the attorneys was saying, is that you would look for a steady record, a steady progression of saying, right, that I'm doing it by the rules. Look I've changed my ways. Not only am I a peacemaker, I'm helping other inmates, but I'm also, you know, working and, okay, you don't want me to use a cell phone, I won't do that. You don't want me to do this, I won't do that. So you establish a record, a lifestyle, if you will, and that is something that we've heard the commissioner say, at least yesterday's decision, and no doubt in today's decision, that played a big part in denying the parole.
Yeah, and speaking of the cell phone violation, I mean, we know that Erik was also in violation of a contraband cell phone, and so was Lyle when he was caught in 2024. That violation meant that he cannot have family visits for 3 years.
Yeah, and well, also what's interesting about listening to the details of these violations, and this might be construed as an excuse, but they committed them when they were in prison for life without the possibility of parole. So that's what they were saying. They're thinking, yeah, I'm going to break a cell phone rule. I'm never getting out anyway. Now, if they had known they had the possibility of being released, maybe their behavior would have been different.
Well, that's what Erik said yesterday.
And so the commissioners are essentially holding that against them. Like, you should have been a model prisoner, right, and followed every rule regardless of whether you had any hope of getting out.
Yeah, because that would translate into when you're free, how are you going to handle the rules?
Right.